history of satellite television and direct-to-home satellite broadcasting is not the story of big business and high-tech industry as it was planned to be. It is the story of how ordinary Americans, backyard experimenters, and garage inventors jumped the gun on corporate America and started the satellite revolution years before it was envisioned. Mark Long picks up the story.
Direct-to-home satellite broadcasting is not a new idea. Mathematician and science fiction author Arthur C. Clarke first proposed the use of satellites for the broadcasting of radio and TV signals way back in 1945. A central part of his discovery was the use of a unique orbit located some 22,000 miles above the Earth's equator. Mr. Clarke wrote of his revolutionary idea in an article entitled Extraterrestrial Relays. A body in such an orbit, he said, would revolve with the Earth and would thus be stationary above the same spot on the planet. It would remain fixed in the sky of a whole hemisphere. Today, all communication satellites use this principle. On the 20th anniversary of Arthur C. Clarke's discovery, NASA launched EarlyBird, the world's first geostationary communication satellite. EarlyBird had the capacity to transmit 240 voice circuits or a single channel of black and white television. Soon after, EarlyBird was followed by other international satellites, for the first time creating a global satellite network. At first, satellite operators had to use extremely large antennas, typically 40 to 120 feet in diameter, to receive these international satellite signals. Back then, only national governments, broadcasters, and a few other groups could afford the large cost of installing and operating these mammoth Earth stations. It wasn't until 1975 that the first private individual attempted to receive satellite television via a backyard dish. At that time, India was using an experimental NASA satellite to transmit television programs to remote Indian villages. A young BBC transmitter manager learned that the satellite was beaming signals not only over the Indian subcontinent, but also to locations as far away as England. In December of 1975, Stephen Burkle used a 5-foot dish made of window screen to receive his first satellite TV signals. What's more, he built the electronic circuitry for the receiver on his kitchen table. His pioneering efforts proved that individuals with modest resources could bring satellite TV signals into their homes.
After maybe 3 months of experimentation and not knowing what time the transmissions were or exactly being able to locate precisely the satellite location, I found a signal, and there it was. It was the AIR, All India Radio crest on the screen, and a test card and some program material. And that was the first satellite TV that I'd ever seen, and I was absolutely knocked out. You could just about make it out in amongst the noise. So that I was really bitten by the bug then, and that led me on to figure that maybe if I can receive UHF from a satellite that's beaming at India, maybe I should have a go at some of this wonderful microwave stuff like 4 gigahertz and so on.
Following the successful launch of the first U.S. domestic satellites in 1974 and 1975, Home Box Office became interested in using communication satellites to send programming to cable TV systems throughout the country.
I called a meeting with HBO and with RCA, Americom, and with, at that time, Monty Rifkin, who headed up ATC, December of '74, at Time Inc. headquarters, and said, hey, I think we ought to move. I think we can price Earth stations 10 meters at, I don't know what we said then, 65,000, I think we said then, which was dramatic. They come from 250 to 100 to 65. We didn't know how to build them at 65, but we figured if we could get some volume going, we'd come down the learning curve. And sure enough, in the spring of '75, HBO agreed to lease some transponders from RCA, and in the September '75, it went on the air with a thriller from Manila, when we installed the first 10-meter TVROs in Jackson, Mississippi, and in Florida, I believe, Fort Pierce.
HBO made its first satellite TV broadcast on September 30th, 1975, when it broadcast the Thrilla in Manila, the championship boxing match between Joe Frazier and Muhammad Ali. Soon thereafter, HBO began making regular use of satellites for broadcasting programming to their affiliate stations throughout the country. Stanford professor Taylor Howard heard about the early HBO transmissions and decided to build his own private receiving station. In July of 1976, he pointed his dish in the direction of what he thought was the RCA satellite.
Well, I was using satellites for something different. We had a group at Stanford that was using one of the Intelsats to relay weather data from Antarctica to the Jamestown Earth Station in California, and then we took it over telephone lines to Stanford, where we were trying to develop synoptic weather maps of Antarctica. And one of the graduate students involved in that program came to me one day and he said, you know, there's video on one of the satellites out there. I said, what do you mean video? And he said, well, pictures. So he said he was down at Jamestown and saw this. So I went home and I had a 15-foot dish left over from my amateur radio moon bounce days, and I built up a receiver out of test equipment, and lo and behold, there was HBO. And I didn't know what it was, I just knew I had a picture. And I remember the first picture very well because I finally found the satellite in the sky, and at that time there was only one, and there was only one transponder active on it, so it was, with a 15-foot dish, it was pretty hard to find. So I finally found this, and it was this all-red screen. And my pictures weren't very good. I had a home-built low-noise amplifier, and everything else was kind of home-built or thrown together. And on this all-red screen, I could tell there was some lettering. It was white lettering kind of shimmering there. So I sat in a chair just like I am now and back from the screen, and I moved the chair back and forth until I was about the right distance. And finally I was able to read the lettering, and it said, "Attention all Earth stations." And I was hooked. I mean, it was hopeless after that.
Here's another kind of television story now. How far some folks will go to watch their favorite programs. Scott Osborne went to a tiny island a long way from nowhere to bring back this special report.
The next major step in the history of DBS was publicity. Bob Cooper, the P.T. Barnum of the early years of satellite TV, was responsible for introducing millions of Americans to the technology. In October of 1978, he wrote an article for TV Guide, which talked about a satellite receiving system he had installed at his home the year before.
At any rate, the article appeared in TV Guide and got a lot of mail. More than 10,000 pieces of mail in about 10 days. It dribbled in for months thereafter, but the mailman got to know us very well because he'd bring in literally sacks full of mail for the 3 or 4 day period there where it kind of peaked, you know, and then fell off to where he could carry it in his hands. And every letter had the same basic request: where do I get one of these?
Bob decided to write back and let people know that he had put together a booklet that would answer their questions.
So we sent all these letters out, and it wasn't but a week later that we started getting checks for $7.50 coming back. Hundreds, thousands of these checks came back. And suddenly I was in the publishing business, which was totally unexpected.
This booklet gave birth to a new industry composed of self-taught inventors and entrepreneurs rather than engineers and corporate giants. Recognizing that this industry desperately needed technical information, Bob decided to publish a magazine and several technical manuals. These included Coop's Satellite Digest and technical manuals written by experimenters such as Taylor Howard, Oliver Swan, and Robert Coleman.
I figured if Taylor will tell Robert Coleman something he's discovered, then why shouldn't we tell everybody else too? And that's what the early couple of years of Coop's Satellite Digest was. Whatever somebody discovered, good, bad, or indifferent, we published it because it was the spreading of information, and it sped up, I think, the maturing process of the home satellite industry.
Bob also founded a series of trade shows which served as an indispensable training ground for manufacturers, technicians, and sales personnel. The infant industry became so successful that by 1986, more than 1 million American homes had satellite dishes. Suddenly, satellite TV had become a force to be reckoned with.
As the fledgling industry neared maturity, its struggle became one of legitimacy.
The capability of turning each box on and off independently. If you don't pay your bill, the program supplier will turn that box off, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Programmers began scrambling their channels and intended to deny dish owners access, calling them pirates, even though the Satellite Industries Trade Association was ready to pay for the programming.
To $10 for the first scramble channel and $6.95 for each additional scramble channel.
Always made it very clear, and I think it's a very important point, that we were willing to pay for the programming that was delivered to us, especially the pay TV programming, the movies. We said we are not pirates. In fact, we're the Boy Scouts. We have another means of technology, an important means. It serves rural Americans, principally. It can also serve suburban and urban Americans. And we want a chance for this new technology to develop.
And as the visionary Buckminster Fuller once pointed out, sometimes it's the little guys who can do the things that big corporations and government agencies are unable to accomplish. Soon, thousands of these little guys all across America stood up and participated in one of the more remarkable grassroots movements in modern U.S. history. Mark Long was one among many rural Americans who tried to gain some support among the nation's lawmakers. In the spring of 1983, he met with the future U.S. Vice President and Nobel Prize winner, Al Gore Jr., to ask his Tennessee congressman to help in the fight to legalize home satellite TV reception.
And as a constituent who was involved in the satellite earth station industry installing dishes in the rural communities of Tennessee, he recognized that I had a problem that really affected all of his constituents, because many of the people that live in the district that he represented at that time were rural people, and they had no other way to gain access to programming. The satellite TV revolution was a way that rural Americans could become first-class media citizens. And he immediately identified with the problem. And true to his word, he made considerable effort on the part of the industry. And he first came to our trade show in 1983 and gave a keynote address, and then went back to Washington, D.C. to begin investigating the problems and possible solutions, which later came about through the adoption of the 1984 cable legislation, which legalized the private ownership and reception of satellite television. You know, there was something really electrifying about that first meeting with Congressman Gore. I'd never gone to talk to a governmental representative before. And when I walked in that office, after 5 minutes, I thought that the congressman really understood our problems, that he went from listening to making comments to making commitments in just a few minutes' time. And this is something that I was totally unprepared for. That my view of what Congress was people that talked a lot and deliberated and really thought out decisions, and they weren't quick to making judgments. But he immediately understood our problems and immediately made a commitment to do something about it. And this was something that totally flabbergasted me at the time, and something that everybody in the satellite industry should remember.
Through the effort of Al Gore Jr. and other key legislators, such as Barry Goldwater, Billy Towson, and Bill Waxman, the public's right to access satellite TV programs finally became legalized.
The fight to keep satellite television programs flowing to earth station owners are really based on a similar principle. This country can only benefit from an open, unencumbered, free flow of information to all its people, whether they live in cities or in rural America, whether they watch cable television or depend on satellite signals.
Allumage. Décollage.
Ironically, with the launch of America's first DBS satellites, the nation's cable TV programmers became home satellite TV's biggest beneficiaries. And the C-band satellite revolution became but a footnote in history. but a footnote testifying to what ordinary people can accomplish when they put their minds and their will to the task.